In the heart of Ohio's Amish country, 50-year-old Ezekiel Miller has lived a life of quiet devotion, hard work, and unwavering faith. As the eldest of the Miller family and a respected member of his community, Ezekiel follows the same routine his father and grandfather followed before him, rising before dawn, tending to his livestock, and living by the simple principles that have guided his people for generations. But on this particular December morning, as fresh snow blankets his 40-acre farm, Ezekiel's world is about to be turned upside down. What starts as a routine check of his property becomes a mystery that will test not only his faith, but challenge everything he believes about forgiveness, family, and the power of compassion. The blood footprints leading to his old wooden shed are just the beginning. What Ezekiel discovers inside will force him to confront a painful past, make an impossible choice, and ultimately learn that sometimes the greatest acts of faith happen not in the meeting house, but in the quiet moments when no one is watching. This is a story about second chances, unconditional love, and the profound truth that healing often comes from the most unexpected places. The rooster's crow pierced the December darkness at exactly 4:47 a.m., just as it had every morning for the past 15 years. Ezekiel Miller's weathered hands found his boots beside the bed without needing to see them, his fingers tracing the familiar worn leather as he pulled them on. At 50, his body moved with the practiced efficiency of a man who had never known the luxury of sleeping in, even on the coldest Ohio mornings. "Another day the Lord has given us," he whispered to himself, careful not to wake his wife Martha, who lay peacefully beside him, her graying hair spread across the pillow like silver threads. Their small bedroom, lit only by the pale moonlight filtering through simple white curtains, held the comforting scent of Martha's lavender sashes and the faint aroma of last night's dinner that still lingered in the house. Ezekiel dressed quickly in the darkness, black pants, blue shirt, suspenders, and the heavy wool coat that would shield him from the bitter December wind. The floorboards, worn smooth by decades of his family's footsteps, creaked softly as he made his way downstairs, each step deliberate and quiet. The old farmhouse, built by his great-grandfather in 1892, seemed to exhale with the settling sounds of aged wood and accumulated memories. In the kitchen, he lit the oil lamp with practiced movements, the warm glow immediately transforming the simple room. The wooden table, scarred from years of family meals and Martha's baking, stood ready for another day. He could almost smell the coffee that Martha would have brewing in another hour, could almost hear the gentle conversation that would fill this space when their 3 children, now grown and married, used to gather here every morning. But this morning felt different. As Ezekiel pulled on his heaviest boots and reached for his coat, something tugged at the edge of his consciousness. Call it intuition, call it the way some mornings seem to carry an extra weight in the air. But he found himself pausing at the kitchen window, looking out at his property with more attention than usual. The snow had fallen steadily through the night, as the weatherman on the neighbor's radio had predicted. Not the angry, biting snow of a blizzard, but the gentle, persistent snowfall that transforms the world into something clean and new. In the lamplight he could see it covering everything: the barn, the fence posts, the old maple tree that had shaded 4 generations of his family, the chicken coop, and beyond that, the small wooden shed where he kept his tools and equipment. Everything looked exactly as it should. On a December morning in Ohio's Amish country, the snow lay undisturbed and perfect, like a blank page waiting to be written upon. The world outside was silent, except for the gentle whisper of snowflakes against the window and the distant sound of his horses shifting in their stalls. Ezekiel turned from the window, picked up his lantern, and stepped outside into the crisp morning air. The cold hit his face immediately, sharp and clean, filling his lungs with the purity that only comes with fresh snow. His breath formed small clouds as he made his way across the yard, his boots sinking slightly into the 6 inches of powder that had accumulated overnight. The routine was always the same: check the horses first, then the cows, then the chickens, and finally a walk around the property to make sure everything was secure. He had followed this pattern for 30 years, ever since he had taken over the farm from his father. In all that time, very little had surprised him. Farming was a life of predictable rhythms, seasonal changes, and the comforting certainty of daily responsibilities. But as he approached the barn, something made him stop there. Barely visible in the soft yellow glow of his lantern were tracks in the snow. Not animal tracks. Ezekiel knew every paw print, hoof print and claw mark that belonged on his property. These were different. These were footprints, human footprints, and they were filled with blood. Ezekiel's heart began to beat faster as he knelt down, holding his lantern closer to examine the strange marks. The prints were small, too small to belong to any of his adult children or neighbors. They looked like they might belong to a child, or perhaps a small woman, but it was the blood that made his stomach tighten with worry. Dark red drops, already beginning to freeze in the cold air, filled each footprint and trailed alongside them. Not just a few drops, but a steady, concerning amount. Someone had been hurt, badly hurt, and they had been walking across his property in the middle of the night during a snowstorm. Following the trail with his lantern held high, Ezekiel could see that the footprints led from the road, across his front yard, past the house where he and Martha slept unknowing, around the barn, and directly toward his old wooden shed at the back of the property. The person, whoever they were, had walked with purpose, despite their obvious injury. The stride was uneven but determined, as if they knew exactly where they were going. As he followed the crimson trail through the snow, Ezekiel's mind raced with possibilities. Could it be one of the neighbor children, hurt and seeking help? A stranger who had been in an accident on the rural road and stumbled onto his property looking for assistance. His community was known for helping anyone in need, regardless of whether they were Amish or English. But why hadn't they come to the house? Why hadn't they knocked on the door and asked for help? The footprints led directly to his shed, a sturdy building he had constructed 15 years ago to store tools, equipment, and supplies. The wooden structure, painted in traditional barn red, stood about 50 feet from the main house, nestled between two large oak trees that provided shade in summer and wind protection in winter. Ezekiel used it regularly for forage projects and farm maintenance, but in winter, he rarely had reason to visit it more than once or twice a week. As he drew closer, his lantern casting dancing shadows across the snow, Ezekiel could see that the footprints ended directly at the shed door. More troubling, he could see that the old wooden door, which he always kept securely latched, was now standing slightly ajar. A thin line of darkness showed where it hadn't been properly closed, and the snow that had blown against it during the night was undisturbed, meaning someone had opened it from the inside. Someone was in his shed. Ezekiel stood in the falling snow, lantern in hand, staring at that partially open door. In 50 years of life, 30 years of marriage, and countless mornings of routine farm work, he had never felt his heart pound quite like this. The blood in the snow told him that whoever was inside was hurt, possibly seriously. His Christian compassion demanded that he help immediately. But caution, the kind that comes from being responsible for a family and property, made him pause. Should he wake Martha? Should he call for help from his neighbor, Joseph Yoder, who lived just half a mile down the road? Should he approach the shed and announce himself, or would that frighten whoever was inside? The wind picked up slightly, blowing snow around his feet and making the partially open door creak softly on its hinges. Somewhere in the distance, a horse whinnied, and the familiar sound grounded him in the reality of his normal morning routine. This was his property, his responsibility, and clearly someone needed his help. "Hello," he called out softly, his voice carrying clearly in the still morning air. "Is someone there? Are you hurt?" No response. He tried again, louder this time but still gentle. "I'm Ezekiel Miller. This is my property. I can see you're injured. Please let me help you." Still nothing but the whisper of falling snow and the distant sounds of his awakening farm. Taking a deep breath and offering a quick prayer for wisdom and protection, Ezekiel approached the shed door. The blood trail was more concentrated here, and he could see where someone had clearly struggled with the latch, their injured hands leaving smears of red on the old wood. His heart ached, thinking of someone so hurt that they were bleeding this much, stumbling through a snowstorm to seek shelter in his simple storage building. With infinite care, he pushed the door open just enough to peer inside, holding his lantern high to cast light into the interior. What he saw in that first moment would be burned into his memory forever, changing not just his morning routine, but the entire course of his life. Huddled in the far corner of the shed, wrapped in a torn and blood-stained blanket that Ezekiel didn't recognize, was a young woman. She couldn't have been more than 20 years old, with dark hair matted with snow and blood, and clothes that were far too thin for the December weather. Her face was turned toward the wall, but he could see she was shivering violently, her entire body trembling from cold and shock. But it wasn't just the sight of this injured young woman that made Ezekiel's breath catch in his throat. It was what she was clutching against her chest, protected by the blood-stained blanket, that made time seem to stop entirely. A babe, a tiny infant, so small it could barely be more than a few weeks old, wrapped in what looked like a hospital blanket. And even from the doorway, even in the dim light of his lantern, Ezekiel could see that the child was moving, breathing, alive. "Dear God, in heaven," he whispered, his voice barely audible. The young woman must have heard him, because she turned slightly, and for the first time, Ezekiel saw her face. Her eyes, large, dark, and filled with a terror so profound it seemed to reach right into his soul, met his. She was just a child herself, he realized, barely more than a teenager. Her face was pale from cold and blood loss. Her lips were blue, and there were bruises on her cheek and around her left eye that were clearly not from her journey through the snow. "Please," she whispered, her voice so soft he almost didn't hear it. "Please don't hurt us. Please." The words hit Ezekiel like a physical blow. In all his 50 years, no one had ever had reason to fear him. He was known in his community as one of the gentlest men you could meet, someone who had never raised his voice in anger, let alone his hand. The fact that this wounded girl was afraid of him, was begging him not to hurt her and her baby, told him more about what she had been through than any explanation could have. "I won't hurt you," he said softly, setting his lantern down just inside the door and keeping his distance so as not to frighten her further. "I'm here to help. You're safe now. You and your baby are." The young woman stared at him for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether she could trust this stranger who had found her in his shed. Her arms tightened around the infant, and Ezekiel could hear the baby making soft sounds, not crying exactly, but the gentle noises that newborns make when they're alive and breathing. "What's your name?" Ezekiel asked gently, crouching down to make himself less threatening. She hesitated for so long he wasn't sure she would answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "Sarah, Sarah," he repeated, letting the name settle between them like a bridge. "That's a beautiful name, a biblical name. And your baby?" Her eyes filled with tears. "Emma, her name is Emma." "Emma," Ezekiel said with a gentle smile. "Also, beautiful." "Hello, Sarah. Hello, little Emma. I'm Ezekiel, and you're both very welcome here." The silence stretched between them, broken only by the soft whisper of snow against the shed walls and the gentle breathing of the infant. Ezekiel remained crouched in the doorway, giving Sarah space while his mind raced with the immediate needs of the situation. The young woman was clearly in shock, bleeding, and suffering from exposure. The baby, though appearing to be breathing normally, was far too young to withstand the cold much longer. "Sarah," he said softly, "I need to get you and Emma somewhere warm. You're both going to freeze if you stay out here much longer." Her grip tightened on the baby, and fear flashed across her face again. "No, no, we can't. He'll find us. He'll find us, and he'll—" Her voice broke off into a sob that she quickly muffled against Emma's blanket. Ezekiel felt his heart clench, the bruises on her face, the terror in her voice, the way she instinctively protected her child. It painted a picture he had hoped never to encounter on his peaceful farm. But here it was, huddled in his shed, shivering and bleeding and desperately afraid. "Who will find you, Sarah?" he asked gently, though part of him already suspected the answer. She shook her head violently, tears streaming down her cheeks. I can't tell you. You don't understand. If he finds us here, if he knows someone helped us." She looked directly at him, and the raw terror in her eyes made him understand that this wasn't just about her safety. She was afraid for his safety too. "Listen to me," Ezekiel said, his voice carrying the quiet authority that came from 30 years of being a husband, father, and community leader. "My wife Martha and I have been married for 28 years. We raised 3 children in that house. We've helped deliver calves in blizzards, nursed sick neighbors through pneumonia, and opened our door to anyone who needed shelter. Whoever you're afraid of, whatever happened to you, you and Emma are under God's protection now, and that means you're under mine." Sarah stared at him, searching his weathered face in the lamplight, as if trying to read the truth of his words. Ezekiel could see the moment when exhaustion and desperation overcame her fear. Her shoulders sagged, and she nodded almost imperceptibly. "Okay," she whispered. But if anything happens to you because of us." "Nothing will happen to me," Ezekiel said with quiet confidence. "Now, can you walk? I need to get you both to the house where it's warm." She struggled to stand, using the wall for support, and Ezekiel could see dark stains on the blanket where blood had soaked through. Whatever injuries she had sustained were serious, and his concern deepened. As she stood, Emma began to fuss softly, the tiny cries of a newborn who was cold and hungry. "How old is she?" Ezekiel asked, standing slowly and picking up his lantern. 3 weeks, Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. "She was born 3 weeks ago. And she's perfect. She doesn't deserve any of this." "No child deserves to be cold and afraid," Ezekiel agreed. "And no mother should have to run through a snowstorm to protect her baby. But you did protect her, Sarah. You brought her somewhere safe." As they made their way slowly toward the shed door, Sarah leaning heavily on the wall for support, Ezekiel noticed something that made him pause. In the corner where she had been huddled, there was a small bag, clearly hastily packed with whatever she could grab. Next to it was something that made his blood run cold, a newspaper, folded to show a headline he could read even in the dim light. "Local man charged in domestic violence case, suspect still at large." Ezekiel quickly looked away, understanding now why Sarah was so terrified, why she had run into a snowstorm with her newborn baby, why she was afraid to trust anyone. The pieces were falling into place, creating a picture of desperation and courage that humbled him. "Sarah," he said as they stepped outside into the still falling snow, "when we get to the house, my wife Martha is going to want to help you. She raised 3 children, and she's delivered more babies in this community than the English doctors. You can trust her completely. Will she ask questions?" Ezekiel considered this as they walked slowly across the yard, his lantern creating a pool of warm light around them. "Martha will ask if you're hurt and what you need. She won't ask anything that might put you in danger. She's wise that way." The walk to the house, which normally took Ezekiel less than a minute, stretched into what felt like hours as Sarah struggled with her injuries and the weight of the baby. Several times she stumbled, and Ezekiel had to resist the urge to steady her, knowing that any sudden movement might frighten her. Instead, he stayed close, ready to help if she fell, speaking softly about the farm, about Martha, about anything that might keep her focused on moving forward. "The house was built by my great-grandfather," he said as they approached the back door. "4 generations of Millers have lived here. It's seen its share of troubles and joys, births and sorrows. The walls have heard heavy kind of prayer, and they've never betrayed a confidence." As they reached the back porch, Ezekiel could see light beginning to show in the kitchen window. Martha would be starting her morning routine soon, beginning the coffee and planning the day's baking. The familiar sight of home filled him with a warmth that had nothing to do with shelter from the cold. "Wait here just a moment," he said softly to Sarah. "Let me prepare Martha so she won't be startled." He knocked gently on the kitchen door, the first time in 30 years of marriage that he had knocked on his own door. After a moment he heard Martha's footsteps, and the door opened to reveal his wife's concerned face. Already dressed for the day, but clearly surprised to see him knocking. "Ezekiel." "What on earth?" Martha began, but her words died as she looked past him and saw Sarah clutching the baby, both of them snow-covered and clearly in distress. Without another word, Martha stepped aside and opened the door wide. "Come in, dear one. Come in right now before you both catch your death." The warmth of the kitchen enveloped them immediately, and Ezekiel watched as some of the tension left Sarah's shoulders for the first time since he had found her. Martha moved with the efficient grace of a woman who had spent decades caring for others, immediately taking charge of the situation without overwhelming their frightened guest. "Sit here by the stove," Martha said, guiding Sarah to the wooden chair closest to the heat source. "Ezekiel, start the coffee extra strong, and get one of my quilts from the chest upstairs. The blue one, it's the warmest." As Ezekiel moved to follow his wife's instructions, he heard Martha's gentle voice continuing to soothe Sarah. "Now then, let me see this precious baby. Oh my, she's beautiful. Look at those tiny fingers. What's her name, dear?" "Emma," Sarah whispered, and Ezekiel could hear the exhaustion threatening to overwhelm her, now that she was finally somewhere warm and safe. "Emma," Martha repeated, just as Ezekiel had. "A strong name, a good name. How old is she?" 3 weeks. Martha made a soft sound of concern. 3 weeks old and out in weather like this. You must have been so frightened. But you're safe now. Both of you are safe." When Ezekiel returned with the quilt, he found Martha gently examining the baby while Sarah sat in stunned silence, as if she couldn't quite believe she was actually somewhere warm and safe. Martha looked up at him with eyes that conveyed everything she needed to know. This young woman and her baby were in serious trouble, and they would be staying. "The baby seems healthy," Martha said quietly, "but Sarah needs medical attention. There's quite a bit of blood, and she's showing signs of shock." "I can't go to a hospital," Sarah said quickly, panic rising in her voice again. "I can't. If they ask for identification, if they call the police..." Martha and Ezekiel exchanged a look that held 30 years of wordless communication. They both understood immediately that this wasn't just about medical care, this was about survival. "Mrs. Yoder," Martha said thoughtfully. "Anna Yoder. She was a midwife for 40 years before she retired. She's helped with difficult situations before, and she knows how to keep confidences." Ezekiel nodded. Anna Yoder lived just 2 farms over, and she had indeed seen everything in her decades of bringing babies into the world. More importantly, she understood that sometimes helping people meant not asking too many questions about where they came from or why they needed help. "I'll walk over and ask her to come," he said. "I'll tell her we have a young mother who needs care, and that discretion is important." Sarah looked between them, tears streaming down her face. "Why are you helping me? You don't even know me. You don't know what I might have done." Martha sat down beside her, taking her hands gently. "Child, I can see in your eyes that you're a good mother who would do anything to protect her baby. That's all I need to know. The rest can wait until you're ready to share it, if you ever are." The kindness in Martha's voice seemed to break something open in Sarah, and she began to cry in earnest, not the quiet, fearful tears she had been shedding, but deep, wrenching sobs that spoke of months or years of held-in pain and fear. "He said he'd kill me," she whispered between sobs. "He said if I ever tried to leave, if I ever tried to take Emma, he'd kill me and make it look like an accident. But I couldn't. I couldn't let her grow up seeing that. I couldn't let her think that's what love looks like." Martha wrapped her arms around the young woman, quilt and all, holding her as she cried. Over Sarah's head, her eyes met Ezekiel's again, and he saw in them the same determination he felt in his own heart. Whatever it took, however long it took, they would help this young woman, and her baby find their way to safety. You did the right thing, Martha whispered into Sarah's hair. You did the brave thing, and now you're going to let us help you do the smart thing. Emma needs her mother healthy and strong, and that means we need to take care of you. As the first rays of actual dawn began to filter through the kitchen windows, mixing with the warm light of the oil lamps, Ezekiel looked at his wife, holding this broken young woman and her tiny baby, and felt something shift in his chest. Their quiet, predictable life was about to become something else entirely, and for the first time in years, that thought didn't frighten him. Instead, it felt like an answer to a prayer he hadn't even known he was praying, a chance to be the hands and feet of his faith in a way that would matter more than any sermon or scripture reading. The blood footprints in the snow had led to so much more than a mystery. They had led to purpose. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the soft whisper of snow against the shed walls and the gentle breathing of the infant. Ezekiel remained crouched in the doorway, giving Sarah space while his mind raced with the immediate needs of the situation. The young woman was clearly in shock, bleeding and suffering from exposure. The baby, though appearing to be breathing normally, was far too young to withstand the cold much longer. Sarah, he said softly, I need to get you and Emma somewhere warm. You're both going to freeze if you stay out here much longer. Her grip tightened on the baby and fear flashed across her face again. No, we can't. He'll find us. He'll find us and he'll... Her voice broke off into a sob that she quickly muffled against Emma's blanket. Ezekiel felt his heart clench. The bruises on her face, the terror in her voice, the way she instinctively protected her child, it painted a picture he had hoped never to encounter on his peaceful farm. But here it was, huddled in his shed, shivering and bleeding and desperately afraid. Who will find you, Sarah? He asked gently, though part of him already suspected the answer. She shook her head violently, tears streaming down her cheeks. I can't tell you. You don't understand. If he finds us here, if he knows someone helped us. She looked directly at him, and the raw terror in her eyes made him understand that this wasn't just about her safety. She was afraid for his safety too. Listen to me, Ezekiel said, his voice carrying the quiet authority that came from 30 years of being a husband, father, and community leader. My wife Martha and I have been married for 28 years. We raised 3 children in that house. We've helped deliver calves in blizzards, nursed sick neighbors through pneumonia, and opened our door to anyone who needed shelter. Whoever you're afraid of, whatever happened to you, you and Emma are under God's protection now, and that means you're under mine. Sarah stared at him, searching his weathered face in the lamplight as if trying to read the truth of his words. Ezekiel could see the moment when exhaustion and desperation overcame her fear. Her shoulders sagged, and she nodded almost imperceptibly. Okay, she whispered. But if anything happens to you because of us, nothing will happen to me, Ezekiel said with quiet confidence. Now, can you walk? I need to get you both to the house where it's warm. She struggled to stand, using the wall for support, and Ezekiel could see dark stains on the blanket where blood had soaked through. Whatever injuries she had sustained were serious, and his concern deepened. As she stood, Emma began to fuss softly, the tiny cries of a newborn who was cold and hungry. How old is she? Ezekiel asked, standing slowly and picking up his lantern. 3 weeks, Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. She was born 3 weeks ago, and she's perfect. She doesn't deserve any of this. No child deserves to be cold and afraid. Ezekiel agreed, and no mother should have to run through a snowstorm to protect her baby. But you did protect her, Sarah. You brought her somewhere safe. As they made their way slowly toward the shed door, Sarah leaning heavily on the wall for support, Ezekiel noticed something that made him pause. In the corner where she had been huddled, there was a small bag, clearly hastily packed with whatever she could grab. Next to it was something that made his blood run cold, a newspaper folded to show a headline he could read even in the dim light. Local man charged in domestic violence case, suspect still at large. Ezekiel quickly looked away, understanding now why Sarah was so terrified, why she had run into a snowstorm with her newborn baby, why she was afraid to trust anyone. The pieces were falling into place, creating a picture of desperation and courage that humbled him. "Sarah," he said as they stepped outside into the still falling snow, "when we get to the house, my wife Martha is going to want to help you. She raised 3 children, and she's delivered more babies in this community than the English doctors. You can trust her completely. Will she ask questions?" Ezekiel considered this as they walked slowly across the yard, his lantern creating a pool of warm light around them. "Martha will ask if you're hurt and what you need. She won't ask anything that might put you in danger. She's wise that way." The walk to the house, which normally took Ezekiel less than a minute, stretched into what felt like hours as Sarah struggled with her injuries and the weight of the baby. Several times she stumbled, and Ezekiel had to resist the urge to steady her, knowing that any sudden movement might frighten her. Instead, he stayed close, ready to help if she fell, speaking softly about the farm, about Martha, about anything that might keep her focused on moving forward. "The house was built by my great-grandfather," he said as they approached the back door. "4 generations of Millers have lived here. It's seen its share of troubles and joys, births and sorrows. The walls have heard every kind of prayer, and they've never betrayed a confidence." As they reached the back porch, Ezekiel could see light beginning to show in the kitchen window. Martha would be starting her morning routine soon, beginning the coffee and planning the day's baking. The familiar sight of home filled him with a warmth that had nothing to do with shelter from the cold. "Wait here just a moment," he said softly. "Sarah, let me prepare Martha so she won't be startled." He knocked gently on the kitchen door, the first time in 30 years of marriage that he had knocked on his own door. After a moment he heard Martha's footsteps, and the door opened to reveal his wife's concerned face, already dressed for the day but clearly surprised to see him knocking. "Ezekiel, what on earth?" Martha began, but her words died as she looked past him and saw Sarah clutching the baby, both of them snow-covered and clearly in distress. Without another word, Martha stepped aside and opened the door wide. "Come in, dear one. Come in right now, before you both catch your death." The warmth of the kitchen enveloped them immediately, and Ezekiel watched as some of the tension left Sarah's shoulders for the first time since he had found her. Martha moved with the efficient grace of a woman who had spent decades caring for others, immediately taking charge of the situation without overwhelming their frightened guest. "Sit here by the stove," Martha said, guiding Sarah to the wooden chair closest to the heat source. "Ezekiel, start the coffee extra strong, and get one of my quilts from the chest upstairs. The blue one, it's the warmest." As Ezekiel moved to follow his wife's instructions, he heard Martha's gentle voice continuing to soothe Sarah. "Now then, let me see this precious baby. Oh my, she's beautiful. Look at those tiny fingers. What's her name, dear?" "Emma," Sarah whispered, and Ezekiel could hear the exhaustion threatening to overwhelm her now that she was finally somewhere warm and safe. "Emma," Martha repeated, just as Ezekiel had. "A strong name, a good name. How old is she?" 3 weeks. Martha made a soft sound of concern. 3 weeks old and out in weather like this. You must have been so frightened. But you're safe now. Both of you are safe." When Ezekiel returned with the quilt, he found Martha gently examining the baby while Sarah sat in stunned silence, as if she couldn't quite believe she was actually somewhere warm and safe. Martha looked up at him with eyes that conveyed everything she needed to know. This young woman and her baby were in serious trouble, and they would be staying. "The baby seems healthy," Martha said quietly. "But Sarah needs medical attention. There's quite a bit of blood, and she's showing signs of shock." "I can't go to a hospital," Sarah said quickly, panic rising in her voice again. "I can't. If they ask for identification, if they call the police." Martha and Ezekiel exchanged a look that held 30 years of wordless communication. They both understood immediately that this wasn't just about medical care, this was about survival. "Mrs. Yoder," Martha said thoughtfully. "Anna Yoder. She was a midwife for 40 years before she retired. She's helped with difficult situations before, and she knows how to keep confidences." Ezekiel nodded. Anna Yoder lived just 2 farms over, and she had indeed seen everything in her decades of bringing babies into the world. More importantly, she understood that sometimes helping people meant not asking too many questions about where they came from or why they needed help. "I'll walk over and ask her to come," he said. "I'll tell her we have a young mother who needs care and that discretion is important." Sarah looked between them, tears streaming down her face. "Why are you helping me? You don't even know me. You don't know what I might have done." Martha sat down beside her, taking her hands gently. "Child, I can see in your eyes that you're a good mother who would do anything to protect her baby. That's all I need to know. The rest can wait until you're ready to share it, if you ever are." The kindness in Martha's voice seemed to break something open in Sarah, and she began to cry in earnest, not the quiet, fearful tears she had been shedding, but deep, wrenching sobs that spoke of months or years of held-in pain and fear. "He said he'd kill me," she whispered between sobs. "He said if I ever tried to leave, if I ever tried to take Emma, he'd kill me and make it look like an accident. But I couldn't let her grow up seeing that. I couldn't let her think that's what love looks like." Martha wrapped her arms around the young woman, quilt and all, holding her as she cried. Over Sarah's head, her eyes met Ezekiel's again, and he saw in them the same determination he felt in his own heart. Whatever it took, however long it took, they would help this young woman and her baby find their way to safety. "You did the right thing," Martha whispered into Sarah's hair. "You did the brave thing. And now you're going to let us help you do the smart thing. Emma needs her mother healthy and strong, and that means we need to take care of you." As the first rays of actual dawn began to filter through the kitchen windows, mixing with the warm light of the oil lamps, Ezekiel looked at his wife, holding this broken young woman and her tiny baby, and felt something shift in his chest. Their quiet, predictable life was about to become something else entirely. And for the first time in years, that thought didn't frighten him. Instead, it felt like an answer to a prayer he hadn't even known he was praying, a chance to be the hands and feet of his faith in a way that would matter more than any sermon or scripture reading. The blood footprints in the snow had led to so much more than a mystery. They had led to purpose. The walk to Anna Yoder's farm took Ezekiel through familiar fields that looked entirely different under their blanket of fresh snow. What normally was a 15-minute walk stretched longer as he trudged through the deeper drifts, his boots breaking through the crust with each step. The snow had stopped falling, and the early morning sky was beginning to lighten from deep purple to pale gray, promising a clear but bitterly cold day. As he walked, Ezekiel's mind churned with everything he had witnessed in the past hour. The terror in Sarah's eyes, the way she had instinctively shielded her baby, the newspaper headline that had made his stomach clench. It all painted a picture that was becoming clearer and more troubling with each passing moment. He had lived his entire life in this peaceful corner of Ohio, where the biggest controversies were usually about farming techniques or minor disagreements over community guidelines. Violence, especially violence against women and children, was something he knew existed in the outside world but had never touched his immediate community. Now it had literally walked through the snow onto his property, carrying a 3-week-old baby and bleeding into his shed. Anna Yoder's farmhouse sat nestled in a grove of pine trees that provided natural windbreaks during the harsh winter months. Smoke rose steadily from the chimney, and Ezekiel could see lamplight in the kitchen windows. At 73, Anna still maintained the schedule of a much younger woman, rising before dawn and keeping busy with various community responsibilities, even though she had officially retired from midwifery 5 years earlier. He knocked softly on her kitchen door, knowing that Anna, like most of the community's older members, was always alert to the sounds around her property. The door opened quickly, revealing a small, sturdy woman with silver hair neatly pinned beneath her prayer covering and intelligent blue eyes that took in Ezekiel's unusual early morning appearance immediately. "Ezekiel Miller," she said, her voice carrying both warmth and concern. "You look like a man with something heavy on his mind." "Anna, I need your help," he said without preamble. "Martha and I have a young woman at our house, barely 20 years old, with a 3-week-old baby. She's been hurt, she's lost some blood, and she needs medical care. But she can't go to a hospital, and she can't answer official questions." Anna studied his face for a long moment, and Ezekiel could see her sharp mind processing, not just his words, but everything he wasn't saying. In her 40 years as a midwife, Anna had undoubtedly encountered situations that required discretion, compassion, and the ability to help without asking too many questions. "How badly is she hurt?" Anna asked, already moving toward a cabinet, where she kept her medical supplies. "I don't know exactly. There was blood in the snow where she walked. Blood on her clothes. She can walk, but she's weak and clearly in shock. The baby appears healthy, but they were both outside in the cold for who knows how long." Anna nodded, pulling items from her cabinet, with practiced efficiency: bandages, antiseptic. Various herbs and tinctures that Ezekiel knew from experience could work as effectively as modern medicine when properly applied. "And you're certain she can't seek official help?" Ezekiel thought about the terror in Sarah's voice when she had whispered, "He said he'd kill me," and nodded grimly. "I'm certain." "Then we help her ourselves," Anna said simply, as if there had never been any other option. "Give me 5 minutes to gather what I need, and I'll come with you." As Anna moved efficiently around her kitchen, collecting supplies and wrapping them carefully in a large basket, Ezekiel felt a surge of gratitude for his community. This was what made their way of life more than just tradition or religion. It was the understanding that when someone needed help, you helped them regardless of the complications or inconvenience. "Ezekiel," Anna said as she tied a warm shawl around her shoulders, "you should know that if this young woman is in the kind of danger I suspect she's in, helping her might bring that danger to your doorstep." "I know," he replied. "Martha and I discussed it without needing to say the words. We're prepared for that." Anna smiled, expression that somehow managed to be both gentle and fierce. "Your parents raised you well, Ezekiel Miller, and you've honored that race." The walk back to the Miller farm was accomplished in comfortable silence, both of them understanding the gravity of the situation they were entering. The sun had risen enough to cast long shadows across the snow, and Ezekiel could see his own footprints from his earlier journey, now joined by Anna's smaller ones as they made their way back toward whatever waited them. When they reached the house, Ezekiel could smell coffee brewing and something baking in the oven. Martha's way of creating normalcy and comfort in any situation. Through the kitchen window he could see Martha moving around the room, and he caught a glimpse of Sarah still sitting by the stove, Emma in her arms. "Martha's made coffee," he said to Anna as they approached the door. "And probably biscuits. She always bakes when she's worried." "Smart woman," Anna replied. "Food and warmth, the first medicines for almost any ailment." They entered the kitchen to find a scene that would have looked perfectly normal to anyone unfamiliar with the circumstances. Martha bustling around her domain, the smell of fresh biscuits filling the air, and a young woman holding her baby by the warm stove. Only the careful way Sarah watched the door, the way she positioned herself so she could see all the exits, and the exhaustion written in every line of her body betrayed the true situation. "Sarah," Martha said gently, "this is Anna Yoder. She's the finest midwife and healer in our community, and she's here to make sure you and Emma are both healthy." Sarah's grip tightened on Emma, and Ezekiel could see the fear flickering in her eyes again. The automatic response of someone who had learned that new people often meant new dangers. Anna approached slowly, her manner calm and unthreatening. "Hello, Sarah. What a beautiful baby you have. May I sit with you for a few minutes? I'd like to make sure you're both doing well after your difficult journey." Something in Anna's voice, perhaps the way she acknowledged the difficult journey without demanding details, or perhaps the genuine warmth in her tone, seemed to reach Sarah. She nodded slightly, and Anna took a seat across from her, close enough to observe but far enough to maintain comfortable distance. "Let me look at little Emma first," Anna said softly, "just to make sure she's warm enough and breathing well." With infinite gentleness, Anna examined the baby, her experienced hands checking Emma's breathing temperature and general condition. Ezekiel watched Sarah's face as Anna worked, seeing the way the young mother relaxed slightly as she observed Anna's competence and obvious care. "She's perfect," Anna pronounced after a thorough but gentle examination. "Alert, good color, breathing beautifully. You've taken excellent care of her under very difficult circumstances." Tears filled Sarah's eyes at the praise. "I've tried so hard to keep her safe. I've been so afraid that I was doing everything wrong, that I wasn't good enough." "Every new mother feels that way," Anna said kindly. "It's the sign of a good mother, worrying about whether you're doing enough. But look at her, Sarah. Look at how content and healthy she is. That's because of you." Martha set a plate of warm biscuits on the table along with fresh coffee, and Ezekiel noticed how she made everything seem natural and unhurried, as if having strangers appear at dawn was a regular occurrence in their household. "Now," Anna said gently, "I'd like to make sure you're healing properly too. I can see you've been through something traumatic, and I want to make sure you're physically able to care for yourself and Emma." Sarah's body went rigid. I'm fine. Really, I just need to rest a little, and then we'll be on our way. I don't want to cause any more trouble." "Child," Anna said with the authority of 7 decades of living, "you're not going anywhere today. Not in this weather, not in your condition, and certainly not with a 3-week-old baby. The question isn't whether you're staying, it's how we're going to help you get strong enough to make good decisions about your future." Martha sat down beside Sarah, her presence solid and reassuring. "Anna's right. You're not imposing, and you're not causing trouble. You're accepting help that's freely given. There's a difference." Sarah looked around the kitchen, taking in these 3 people who had welcomed her without question, who were offering help without demanding explanations or payment in return. For a moment her composure cracked completely. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Why are you being so kind to me? You don't know anything about me. You don't know what I might have done, what I might be running from." Ezekiel found himself speaking before he had fully formed the words. "Sarah, in our community, we believe that God sends people to us when we need them most, and when they need us most. Maybe you came to our farm by accident, or maybe you came because this is where you were supposed to find safety. Either way, you're here now, and that means something." He paused, looking at this young woman who had stumbled through a snowstorm carrying her baby, seeking shelter in a stranger's shed. "We also believe that everyone deserves a chance to start over, to find peace, to raise their children in safety. If that's what you're looking for, then we want to help you find it." Anna had been quietly observing Sarah during this exchange, and now she spoke with gentle firmness. "But first we need to make sure you're physically well enough to care for Emma. I can see you're favoring your left side, and there's still blood on your clothes. Will you let me help you?" For a long moment, Sarah sat in silence, holding Emma close and looking at each of their faces. Finally, she nodded. "Okay. But if anyone comes looking for me, if anyone asks questions, no one will learn anything from us," Anna said with quiet conviction. "You have my word on that." As Anna began her gentle examination, Martha moved to give them privacy, and Ezekiel found himself standing at the kitchen window, looking out at the snow-covered farm that had been his peaceful sanctuary for 50 years. The blood footprints that had led him to Sarah were already being covered by new snowfall, but the changes they had brought to his life were just beginning. In the space of a few hours, his quiet morning routine had become something entirely different. His home had become a refuge. His simple faith had become a call to action. And somewhere out there, possibly looking for Sarah and Emma, was the source of the danger that had driven them into the storm. Ezekiel realized that for the first time in his adult life, he genuinely didn't know what tomorrow would bring. The thought should have been frightening, but instead, it felt like the beginning of the most important thing he would ever do. Anna's examination revealed what Ezekiel had feared. Sarah had several deep cuts on her arms and hands, likely from broken glass, and bruising that spoke of violence that went far beyond a single incident. The young woman submitted to Anna's gentle care with the resigned patience of someone who had learned to endure pain in silence. But Ezekiel could see the way she flinched whenever Anna touched certain areas, as if her body had memorized every hurt. "These cuts need proper cleaning and bandaging," Anna said quietly to Martha, while Sarah dozed fitfully in the chair by the stove, Emma sleeping peacefully in her arms. "And the bruising, some of this is old, Martha. Weeks old, maybe months." Martha's face tightened with the controlled anger of a mother who understood exactly what Anna was telling her. "How long do you think this has been going on?" "Long enough that she's learned to hide it well," Anna replied, mixing a poultice from herbs she'd brought. "Long enough that running into a snowstorm with a newborn seemed like the safer option." Ezekiel, standing near the window where he'd been watching the road for any sign of approaching trouble, turned at Anna's words. "What can we do, beyond caring for her injuries, I mean? She can't stay hidden in our kitchen forever, and if someone is looking for her, one step at a time," Anna said with the practical wisdom of someone who had helped countless families through crises. "First, we get her healthy, then we help her figure out her options. But Ezekiel, you need to understand, if the man she's running from is determined to find her, he will, and when he does, he won't care who gets in his way." The weight of that statement settled over the kitchen like a heavy blanket. Ezekiel had spent his entire life avoiding conflict, solving problems through patience and community cooperation. The idea that violence might come to his farm, might threaten his wife and this young woman he'd committed to protecting, was foreign and frightening. But as he looked at Sarah, holding her baby with fierce protectiveness, even in sleep, he felt something steel inside him. He had made a choice when he'd opened that shed door. He had made a promise when he'd told her she was, and Ezekiel Miller had never broken a promise in his 50 years of life. "Then we'll deal with that when it happens," he said quietly. "For now, she's here, and she needs help." Anna nodded approvingly. "That's the right approach. Now I'm going to clean these cuts properly, but I'll need her awake for some of it. Martha, could you take the baby?" As if sensing the conversation around her, Sarah stirred and opened her eyes, immediately alert in the way that spoke of learned hypervigilance. Her first instinct was to check on Emma, and only when she saw the baby was safe did she look around the kitchen. "How long was I asleep?" she asked, panic creeping into her voice. "I shouldn't have. I need to stay awake. I need to watch." "You were only sleeping for a few minutes," Martha said gently, settling into the chair beside her. "And you were safe the whole time. We were watching." "I can't let my guard down," Sarah said, struggling to sit up straighter despite her obvious exhaustion. "You don't understand. He's very smart. He's charming. People like him. When he tells them that his wife ran away and stole his baby, they believe him. They help him look for us." Ezekiel felt a chill that had nothing to do with the December morning. "He's your husband." Sarah's laugh was bitter and broken. "He says he is. We never had a ceremony, never signed papers, but he told everyone we were married. He told me that made me his, and that Emma was his, and that the law would side with him if I ever tried to leave." "That's not how the law works," Anna said firmly, though her expression was troubled. "But I understand why you might believe it. Men like that are very good at making women feel trapped and powerless." "He is powerful," Sarah said, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. "He has money. He knows people, important people. And when I tried to get help before..." She trailed off, unconsciously touching the faded bruises on her face. Martha leaned forward. "What happened when you tried to get help?" Sarah was quiet for so long that Ezekiel thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was flat and emotionless, as if she was reciting facts that had happened to someone else. "I called the police once, About 6 months ago, when I was still pregnant. He had pushed me down the stairs, and I thought maybe the baby was hurt. 2 officers came to the house. Nice officers, especially the woman. She seemed to really care. Sarah shifted Emma to her other arm, and Ezekiel could see her hands shaking slightly as she continued. But Marcus, that's his name, Marcus. He was so charming. He told them I was having a difficult pregnancy, that I'd been emotional and clumsy, that he was worried about my mental state. He showed them pictures of me from when I'd fallen before, from when I'd had accidents. He made it sound like he was the concerned boyfriend just trying to take care of his unstable girlfriend. The kitchen fell silent except for the gentle crackling of the fire and Emma's soft breathing. Ezekiel found himself gripping the back of his chair, fighting against an anger he rarely allowed himself to feel. They believed him, Sarah continued. The male officer completely believed him. The female officer seemed less sure, but she couldn't prove anything. And after they left, Marcus was so angry. He said if I ever embarrassed him like that again, if I ever made him look bad in front of people who mattered, he would make sure I disappeared permanently. And you believed he could do it, Anna said softly. I knew he could do it, Sarah corrected. He showed me newspaper clippings of other women who had disappeared after causing problems for important men. He said it happened all the time, that nobody really looked too hard when troublesome women went missing. Martha reached over and took Sarah's free hand. But you found the courage to leave anyway. Not courage, Sarah said with a sad smile. Fear. When Emma was born, when I saw her perfect little face and tiny hands, I realized that staying wasn't just dangerous for me anymore. It was dangerous for her. I couldn't let her grow up thinking that love meant being afraid all the time. When did you decide to run? Ezekiel asked gently. 3 days ago. Marcus had been drinking more than usual, and he was talking about how Emma looked too much like me, how he wanted a son instead. He said maybe next time we'd get it right. Maybe next time I'd give him what he wanted instead of this useless little thing. Sarah's voice broke on the last words. That's when I knew I had to get her away from him. I didn't have a plan, didn't have money, didn't even know where to go. I just waited until he passed out, packed what I could carry, and started walking. In a snowstorm, Martha said, shaking her head in amazement. With a 3-week-old baby. My dear girl, you are braver than you know. I wasn't brave, Sarah protested. I was terrified. I still am terrified. I don't know anything about being on my own. I don't know how to get a job or find a place to live. I don't even have a driver's license. Marcus never let me learn to drive. He said I didn't need to since he would take me anywhere I needed to go. Anna had been quietly preparing supplies while Sarah talked, and now she approached with bandages and antiseptic. We're going to take care of these cuts now, she said gently, and while I work, I want you to listen to me very carefully. As Anna began cleaning Sarah's wounds with gentle efficiency, she spoke in the calm, authoritative voice that had comforted countless women over the decades. You are not powerless, Sarah. You proved that by leaving. You are not stupid or helpless. You proved that by keeping yourself and Emma alive during a 3-day journey in winter weather. You are not alone. You proved that by trusting us enough to accept help. Sarah winced as Anna cleaned a particularly deep cut, but her eyes never left the older woman's face. What you are, Anna continued, is a young woman who has been systematically convinced that she has no value, no options and no hope. But that was a lie designed to control you. The truth is that you have value simply because you exist. You have options, maybe not easy ones, but they exist. And you have hope because you're here, alive, with your daughter safe in your arms. But what happens next? Sarah asked, tears streaming down her cheeks. I can't stay here forever. You have your own lives, your own families. And if Marcus finds me here, if he hurts you because of me. Ezekiel moved from his position by the window to crouch beside Sarah's chair, putting himself at eye level with her. Sarah, look at me. Really look at me. She met his eyes, and he could see the depth of her exhaustion and fear. I am 50 years old, he said quietly. I have lived in this community my entire life. I have raised 3 children, helped my neighbors through countless difficulties, and tried every day to live according to my faith. In all that time, I have never felt more certain about anything than I feel about this. You and Emma belong here for as long as you need to be here. But no buts, Martha interrupted, moving to stand behind her husband. Ezekiel is right. This is where you're supposed to be for as long as you need to be here. And we're going to figure out the rest together. Sarah looked around the kitchen at these 3 people who had welcomed her without reservation, who were offering her something she had almost forgotten existed: unconditional kindness. For the first time since Emma's birth, she allowed herself to imagine a future that didn't involve constant fear. But even as she felt a tiny spark of hope beginning to grow in her chest, a part of her remained vigilant, waiting for the sound of a car engine or footsteps on the porch that would signal that Marcus had found them. Because men like Marcus always found what they were looking for eventually, and when they did, they didn't come alone. The next 3 days passed in a rhythm that felt both natural and surreal. Sarah and Emma had been settled in the small guest room that Martha had prepared with characteristic efficiency: fresh linens, extra quilts, and a wooden cradle that had once held the Miller children and now rocked gently the bed whenever Emma stirred. Sarah was healing, both physically and in ways that were harder to measure. The cuts on her arms were mending under Anna's careful attention. The bruises were fading from dark purple to yellow-green. And most importantly, she was beginning to sleep without jerking awake at every small sound. Emma was thriving on the regular feedings and constant warmth, her tiny face growing rounder and more alert each day. But it was the small moments that told Ezekiel the most about their progress. The way Sarah had started helping Martha with simple kitchen tasks, moving carefully but with growing confidence. The way she had actually smiled when Emma had grasped her finger with surprising strength. The way she had begun to speak about the future in terms of when, rather than if. On the 3rd morning, Ezekiel found Sarah standing at the kitchen window, Emma in her arms, watching the sun rise over the snow-covered fields. There was something different about her posture, something that spoke of someone beginning to believe in the possibility of peace. "It's beautiful here," she said softly, as he joined her at the window. "I'd forgotten that the world could be beautiful. It's God's world," Ezekiel replied simply. "Even when we can't see the beauty through our troubles, it's still there waiting for us." Sarah was quiet for a moment, then said something that surprised him. "Martha told me you have 3 children. We do, all grown now, all married, all with children of their own. Do they live nearby?" Ezekiel smiled, thinking of his scattered family. "Rebecca lives about an hour north, with her husband and 2 daughters. Samuel is in Pennsylvania with his wife and 3 children. And our youngest, David, is in Indiana with his new bride. They were married just this past fall. Do you miss them?" "Every day," he admitted, "but that's the way it should be. Children are meant to build their own lives, their own homes. Martha and I, we've had 30 years of full breakfast tables and busy evenings. Now we have quiet mornings and long conversations by the fire." Sarah adjusted Emma in her arms, looking thoughtful. "I never had that. A real family, I mean. I grew up in foster care, moved around a lot. I used to dream about what it would be like to belong somewhere, to have people who cared whether I came home at night." "You have that now," Martha said, entering the kitchen with her arms full of fresh laundry. "For as long as you want it." The simple statement hung in the air between them, and Ezekiel saw tears spring to Sarah's eyes. After 3 days of kindness, she was still surprised by it, still waiting for conditions to be attached or patience to run out. "I need to learn how to take care of myself," Sarah said quietly. "I need to figure out how to support Emma. I can't just hide here forever." "You're not hiding," Anna said, appearing in the doorway with her medical bag. "You're recovering. There's a difference, and recovery takes time." Anna had been coming by every morning to check on Sarah's progress, but Ezekiel suspected the visits were as much about emotional support as medical care. Anna had taken a special interest in Sarah, seeing perhaps something of herself in the young mother's determination to protect her child. "Let me see those hands," Anna said, settling Sarah at the kitchen table. "The cuts are healing nicely, but I want to make sure there's no infection." As Anna unwrapped the bandages, Sarah asked a question that had been weighing on all their minds. "Anna, in all your years of helping people, have you ever known anyone who successfully got away from someone like Marcus?" Anna's hands stilled for a moment, and when she looked up, her expression was serious, but not without hope. "Yes," she said simply. "I've known several women who found the courage to leave dangerous situations. It wasn't easy for any of them, and it didn't happen overnight. But they built new lives, safe lives. How? Different ways. Some had family who could help. Some found organizations that specialize in helping women in your situation. Some, like you, found communities that were willing to offer shelter and support while they figured out their next steps." Sarah looked around the kitchen at the three people who had become her unlikely guardians. "I still can't believe you're all real. I keep thinking I'm going to wake up back in that house, and this will all have been a dream." "We're real," Martha said firmly, setting a plate of warm muffins on the table. "And so is your right to live without fear." "Martha's right," Ezekiel added. "But Sarah, we need to start thinking practically about your future. Not because we want you to leave, but because you need to know you have choices." Anna nodded in agreement. "There are legal ways to protect yourself and Emma. Restraining orders, custody arrangements, programs that help women start over with new identities if necessary. But all of that requires going to authorities," Sarah said, the familiar panic creeping back into her voice. "And Marcus knows people, important people. What if they don't believe me? What if they side with him? Then we find different authorities," Ezekiel said with quiet determination. "Sarah, you need to understand something about our community. We may live simply, but we're not isolated from the outside world. We know people too, judges, lawyers, social workers, who can be trusted. Anna delivered babies for half the county for 40 years. She knows everyone." Anna smiled. "It's true. I know which judges have daughters, which lawyers have seen what abuse can do to families, which social workers genuinely care about protecting children, and I know which ones to avoid." For the first time since arriving at the farm, Sarah allowed herself to consider the possibility that there might be a way forward that didn't involve constant running and hiding. "What would I have to do?" she asked quietly. "First, we'd need to document everything. Anna, the injuries, the threats, the pattern of control and abuse. I've been taking photographs of your healing wounds, and I've kept detailed medical records. Then we'd need to find you legal representation," Ezekiel continued. "Someone who specializes in domestic violence cases and understands the complexities involved. And we'd need to make sure you and Emma have somewhere safe to stay during the process." Martha added, "Somewhere Marcus can't find you or manipulate the situation." Sarah looked down at Emma, who was sleeping peacefully in her arms, tiny fists curled against her cheeks. "It sounds complicated and expensive, and I don't have any money, any resources. You have us," Martha said simply, "and our community. We take care of our own, Sarah. You became one of ours the moment you stepped into our shed. But I'm not Amish. I'm not even particularly religious. I don't belong. Belonging isn't about being Amish." Ezekiel interrupted gently. "It's about being family, and families protect each other." As if sensing the emotional weight of the conversation, Emma chose that moment to wake up and begin fussing for her feeding. Sarah stood to prepare a bottle, and Martha automatically moved to help, the two women working together with the ease that had developed over their days of shared caregiving. "There's something else we need to consider," Anna said once Sarah had settled back down with Emma. "Eventually, Marcus is going to realize that you didn't just disappear. He's going to start looking more actively. When he does, he's going to check with local hospitals, police stations, shelters." "How long do you think we have?" Ezekiel asked. "Hard to say. Could be days, could be weeks. Men like Marcus often have periods where they convince themselves their victims will come back on their own. But when that doesn't happen, they escalate. Sarah's face paled. What kind of escalation? Anna chose her words carefully. He might hire private investigators. He might start offering rewards for information. He might begin showing up at places where he thinks you might go. Churches, community centers, anywhere that helps people in trouble. He might come here, Sarah whispered, clutching Emma closer. He might, Ezekiel acknowledged. But if he does, he'll find that this isn't the kind of community that gives up its people easily. What does that mean? Martha smiled, and there was something almost fierce in her expression. It means that Marcus may be charming and powerful in his world, but this is our world, and in our world, community means something. As if summoned by their conversation about outside threats, the sound of a car engine reached them from the road. All four adults froze, listening as the vehicle slowed, turned into the Miller driveway, and came to a stop near the house. Sarah went rigid with terror, her face draining of all color. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no. He found us. He found us already." Ezekiel moved quickly to the window, peering out at the unfamiliar sedan parked in his driveway. "It's not him," he said quickly, seeing Sarah's panic. "It's a woman, older woman, driving alone." But even as relief flooded through Sarah, Ezekiel felt a chill of apprehension. In 30 years of living on this farm, unexpected visitors were rare, and given their current situation, any unexpected visitor felt like a potential threat. The woman who emerged from the car was indeed older, perhaps 60, well-dressed in a way that suggested money and authority. She moved with purpose toward the front door, and something about her demeanor made Ezekiel certain that this visit was somehow connected to Sarah. "Anna," he said quietly, "take Sarah and Emma upstairs, now." But Sarah began. "Now," Martha said firmly, already moving to help gather Emma's things. "We don't know who this is or what she wants, but until we do, you stay out of sight." As the three women hurried toward the stairs, Ezekiel heard the firm knock on his front door. Taking a deep breath and offering a silent prayer for wisdom, he went to answer it, knowing that the peaceful interlude of the last 3 days was about to come to an end. The calm was over. Whatever came next would test everything they had promised Sarah about safety, community, and the power of people standing together against the darkness. Ezekiel opened the front door to find a woman who looked like she'd stepped out of a business magazine. Perfectly styled gray hair, expensive coat, and the kind of confident posture that came from a lifetime of having people listen when she spoke. Her smile was professional, practiced, and somehow managed to feel both warm and calculating at the same time. "Good morning," she said, extending a manicured hand. "I'm Patricia Whitmore from Child Protective Services. I'm here about a report we received regarding a young woman and infant who may be in danger." Ezekiel felt his heart sink, even as he maintained his calm exterior. He had hoped they would have more time, more opportunity to help Sarah build legal protections before the outside world found them. But he kept his voice steady as he responded. "I'm Ezekiel Miller. What kind of report?" Patricia's smile never wavered. "May I come in? I understand this is sensitive, and I'd prefer not discuss it on your front porch." Every instinct told Ezekiel to refuse, to claim ignorance, to protect Sarah by denying she was there. But he also knew that lying to Child Protective Services could create far worse problems than whatever Patricia Whitmore had come to discuss. "Of course," he said, stepping aside to let her enter. Patricia looked around the simple living room with interest, taking in the handmade furniture, the oil lamps, the family photographs on the mantelpiece. "You have a lovely home, Mr. Miller. Very peaceful. Thank you. Can I offer you some coffee? That would be wonderful." As they walked toward the kitchen, Ezekiel could hear the floorboards creaking softly overhead. Martha, Anna, and Sarah moving quietly in the upstairs bedroom. He hoped desperately that Emma wouldn't choose this moment to cry. In the kitchen, Patricia settled herself at the table while Ezekiel poured coffee with hands that he was grateful, remained steady. "Now then," she said, pulling out a small notebook. "I received a call yesterday from a very concerned gentleman who believes his girlfriend and infant daughter may be in immediate danger." "What kind of danger?" Ezekiel asked, though he already knew the answer. According to Mr. Marcus Hendricks, his girlfriend Sarah Peterson suffers from severe postpartum depression and has been having episodes of violence and self-harm. He's worried that she may have taken their 3-week-old daughter and is planning to hurt herself and the child. Ezekiel set down his coffee cup with deliberate care. "And what makes Mr. Hendricks think they might be here?" Patricia consulted her notes. "He said Sarah has a fascination with Amish communities. Something about the simple life and traditional value." He checked with several communities in Pennsylvania and Indiana before someone suggested he try Ohio. "Your farm was one of several he asked me to check." "I see. And you believed his story." Something flickered across Patricia's face, surprise perhaps at the directness of his question. "Miller, I've been doing this job for 25 years. I've learned to be cautious about taking anyone's story at complete face value. That's why I'm here to investigate rather than simply accepting his report." Ezekiel studied her face, trying to read the woman behind the professional mask. "What did you think of Mr. Hendricks when you met him?" "He was very charming," Patricia said slowly. "Very concerned, very articulate about his girlfriend's mental state and his fears for the baby's safety. He provided medical records, photographs of injuries he claimed she inflicted on herself, character references from several prominent community members. But Patricia was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was softer, less official. "But in 25 years of doing this job, I've learned to trust my instincts. And my instincts told me that Marcus Hendricks was performing rather than genuinely worried." Relief flooded through Ezekiel so powerfully that he had to grip the edge of the table. "What kind of performance?" "The kind that men put on when they're trying very hard to appear like the victim instead of the perpetrator. The kind where every detail is just a little too perfect, every emotion just a little too calculated." Patricia leaned forward, her professional mask dropping completely. "Miss Miller, is Sarah Peterson here?" Ezekiel met her eyes directly. "If she were, would she be safe with you?" "That depends," Patricia said honestly. "If she's genuinely in danger from Mr. Hendricks, then yes, I would move heaven and earth to protect her and her baby. But if she's actually unstable and posing a threat to her child, then my first obligation is to that infant's safety." "And how would you determine which is true?" "By talking to her, by observing her with the baby, by looking at the actual evidence rather than just accepting what I've been told." Patricia paused, then added quietly, "Mr. Miller, I have a daughter Sarah's age. If she were running from someone who wanted to hurt her, I would pray that she found people like you to help her." The words hung in the kitchen air, and Ezekiel made a decision that would change everything. "Sarah is upstairs with my wife and our friend Anna. She's been here for 3 days, recovering from injuries that weren't self-inflicted." Patricia nodded as if she had expected this answer. "May I see her?" "That depends on her," Ezekiel said. "She's been hurt badly, Ms. Whitmore. Not just physically. She's terrified, and she has good reason to be. I won't force her to do anything that makes her feel unsafe." "I understand, but Mr. Miller, you need to know that Marcus Hendricks isn't just going to give up and go away. If I don't file a report, he'll find someone else who will. Someone who might not be as skeptical about his story." As if summoned by the conversation, soft footsteps could be heard on the stairs, and Martha appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Ezekiel, Sarah would like to speak with Miss Whitmore." Patricia looked surprised. "She knows I'm here?" "The walls aren't that thick," Martha said with a slight smile. "She heard enough to understand what's happening, and she's braver than she knows." A moment later, Sarah entered the kitchen carrying Emma. with Anna close behind. She looked pale but determined, and Ezekiel felt a surge of pride at her courage. "Mrs. Whitmore," Sarah said quietly, "I'm Sarah Peterson. This is my daughter Emma. And before you ask, no, I'm not mentally ill. And no, I've never hurt myself or my baby." Patricia's professional training took over, and she observed Sarah with the keen eye of someone trained to assess situations quickly. She took in Sarah's healing injuries, the way she held Emma with confident competence, the alertness in her eyes despite her obvious exhaustion. "Hello, Sarah," Patricia said gently. "How are you feeling?" "Scared," Sarah answered honestly, "but safer than I've felt in months. Can you tell me about your relationship with Marcus Hendricks?" For the next 20 minutes, Sarah told her story with a clarity and detail that impressed everyone in the room. She spoke about the gradual escalation of control and violence, about the isolation, about the threat. She showed Patricia the photographs Anna had taken of her injuries, the medical notes documenting her condition when she arrived. Most importantly, she spoke about Emma with the clear, focused love of a devoted mother. "Miss Whitmore," Sarah said finally, "I know Marcus is charming. I know he's convincing. I know he has money and influence and can make people believe whatever he wants them to believe. But I also know that if you send me back to him, he will kill me. And I don't know what will happen to Emma." Patricia had been taking notes throughout Sarah's account, and now she closed her notebook and looked around the kitchen at the 4 people who had created this unlikely sanctuary. "Sarah," she said finally, "what do you want to happen next?" "I want to press charges against Marcus for assault and false imprisonment. I want a restraining order. I want legal custody of Emma that he can't challenge. And I want to build a life where my daughter never has to see her mother afraid." "Those are all reasonable goals," Patricia said, "and they're all achievable with the right help." She turned to Ezekiel and Martha. "I need to ask, are you willing to continue providing Sarah and Emma with shelter while we work through the legal process? It could take weeks or even months." "As long as they need," Martha said without hesitation. "And you understand that Marcus Hendricks will likely escalate his efforts to find them. That he might bring legal pressure to bear, might try to make your lives difficult. Let him try," Ezekiel said quietly, but with steel in his voice. "This is our community. These are our people now, and we don't abandon our people." Patricia smiled, the first genuine, unguarded smile she'd shown since arriving. "In that case, let me make some phone calls. I know a prosecutor who specializes in domestic violence cases and a family court judge who has no patience for men who use the legal system to continue their abuse." As Patricia began making calls from her cell phone, stepping into the living room for privacy, Anna turned to Sarah with satisfaction. "You did well," she said. "You told the truth clearly and completely. That takes courage." Sarah was trembling slightly now that the formal interview was over, and Emma was beginning to fuss in her arms. "What if she decides Marcus was right? What if she thinks I'm unfit?" "She won't," Martha said with quiet confidence. "Did you see how she looked at you when you were talking about Emma? She saw what we see, a young woman who would do anything to protect her child." As if to prove Martha's point, Patricia returned to the kitchen with a satisfied expression. "Good news. I've spoken with District Attorney Jennifer Walsh, and she wants to meet with Sarah this afternoon. She's agreed to fast-track the legal proceedings, and she's confident she can get an emergency restraining order in place by tomorrow." "What about Marcus?" Sarah asked. "What happens when he finds out I've contacted authorities?" "He doesn't find out until it's too late to interfere," Patricia said firmly. "Miss Walsh is very good at what she does, and she's handled cases like this before. By the time Marcus knows what's happening, you'll have legal protections in place." For the first time since she'd arrived at the farm, Sarah began to cry, not tears of fear or despair, but tears of relief and hope. "It's really going to be okay, isn't it?" she whispered. Ezekiel looked around the kitchen at this group of women who had come together to protect one young mother and her baby, and felt something profound settle in his chest. "Yes," he said with absolute certainty. It's really going to be okay. But even as he spoke the words, even as hope filled the kitchen like warm sunlight, none of them knew that Marcus Hendricks was already on his way to Ohio. And unlike the woman from Child Protective Services, when Marcus arrived, he wouldn't be coming alone. 2 days later, as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the snow-covered farm, Ezekiel was in the barn tending to his horses when he heard the sound that had been haunting his dreams, multiple car engines turning into his driveway. Through the barn window he watched as 3 black SUVs pulled up to his house, and his blood ran cold. Marcus Hendricks emerged from the lead vehicle like a man accustomed to owning every room he entered. Even from a distance, Ezekiel could see the expensive clothes, the confident posture, the way the other men automatically deferred to him. 4 other men got out of the remaining vehicles. Large men who looked more like security than friends. This was not a man who had come to discuss things reasonably. Ezekiel's first instinct was to run to the house, to place himself between Marcus and the women inside. But 30 years of farming had taught him patience and strategy. Instead, he slipped out the back of the barn and circled around to enter the house through the kitchen door. Inside, Martha, Anna, and Sarah had already seen the vehicles arriving. Sarah stood frozen at the kitchen window, Emma clutched against her chest, her face white with terror. "He found us," she whispered. "Oh God, he found us." "Sarah," Martha said firmly, taking her by the shoulders, "remember what Patricia said. You have legal protections now. The restraining order is in place. He cannot legally take you or Emma anywhere." "He doesn't care about legal," Sarah said, her voice rising toward panic. "You don't understand what he's capable of." The sound of heavy footsteps on the front porch cut off her words, followed by an aggressive pounding on the door that made everyone in the kitchen flinch. "Sarah," Marcus's voice carried clearly through the house, smooth and reasonable, but with an undertone of steel. "Sarah, I know you're in there. We need to talk." Ezekiel moved toward the front door, but Anna caught his arm. "Wait. Let me." The 73-year-old woman walked with surprising authority to the front door and spoke through it without opening it. "Mr. Hendricks, I presume? I'm Anna Yoda, and I need to inform you that you are in violation of a restraining order. You need to leave this property immediately." Marcus's laugh was cold and humorless. "Ma'am, I appreciate your concern, but this is a family matter. I'm here for my wife and daughter, and I'm not leaving without them." "Sarah is not your wife," Anna said firmly, "and you have no legal claim to Emma. The restraining order is very clear." "The restraining order is based on lies," Marcus replied, his voice hardening. "Sarah is mentally ill. She needs help, and our daughter needs protection from her mother's delusions." Sarah had begun shaking so violently that Martha had to help support her. "He's going to take Emma," she whispered. "He's going to convince them that I'm crazy, and he's going to take my baby." "No," Ezekiel said with quiet intensity, moving to stand beside Anna at the door. "He's not." "Mr. Miller," Marcus called out, having clearly done his research. "I understand you're trying to help, but you don't know what you're dealing with. Sarah is dangerous. She hurt herself to make it look like I abused her. She's been planning this for months." "That's interesting," Ezekiel replied through the door, "because the medical evidence suggests otherwise." There was a pause, and when Marcus spoke again, his voice had shifted, less reasonable, more threatening. "Mr. Miller, I'm a reasonable man, but my patience has limits. I have legal documents giving me emergency custody of my daughter. I have a court order allowing me to take Sarah for psychiatric evaluation. I have 5 witnesses who will testify to her unstable behavior. And I have a restraining order that says you can't come within 500 feet of Sarah or Emma." Anna shot back. "Which means you're currently breaking the law." Another pause, longer this time. "Then Mr. Miller, Mrs. Yoda, I can see you're good people who think you're helping, but you're being manipulated by a very sick young woman. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Ezekiel looked back at Sarah, who was now sitting in a kitchen chair, rocking Emma and crying silently. In that moment, Seeing her terror and desperation, something crystallized in his mind. This wasn't just about offering shelter to someone in need anymore. This was about standing between evil and innocence. "Mr. Henders," he called out, "I think you're the one who doesn't understand what you're dealing with." Ezekiel opened the front door, stepped outside onto the porch, and found himself face to face with Marcus Hendricks for the first time. The man was everything Sarah had described. Handsome, well-dressed, radiating the kind of confidence that came from a lifetime of getting his way. But Ezekiel could see what Sarah had learned to recognize, the cold calculation behind the charming smile, the barely controlled rage when things didn't go according to plan. "Mr. Miller," Marcus said, extending his hand as if they were meeting at a social function. "Marcus Hendricks. Thank you for taking care of Sarah during her episode, but I'm here to take my family home now." Ezekiel didn't take the offered hand. "Your family isn't here, Mr. Hendricks." Marcus's smile faltered slightly. "I'm sorry?" "I said your family isn't here. There's a young woman and her daughter who are under the protection of this community, but they're not your family. They never were." "Mr. Miller," Marcus said, his voice taking on a patronizing tone, "I understand you mean well, but you're interfering in a domestic situation you don't understand. Sarah is sick. She needs help. The only sick thing I see," Ezekiel said quietly, "is a man who would terrorize a young mother and threaten the people trying to protect her." Marcus's facade cracked visibly. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. I have lawyers, connections, resources. I can make your life very difficult. And you have no idea who you're dealing with," Ezekiel replied. "This is an Amish community, Mr. Hendricks. We've been taking care of our own for over 300 years. We've survived religious persecution, government interference, and men who thought their money and connections made them untouchable." As if summoned by their voices, neighbors began appearing. First Joseph Yoder, Anna's son, walking across the field from his farm. Then the Stoltzfus family from down the road. Then more, emerging from houses and barns and fields, drawn by the sound of trouble in their community. Within minutes, 24 Amish men, women and children had quietly gathered in Ezekiel's yard, saying nothing but making their presence known. They stood peacefully, hands at their sides, faces calm but determined. Marcus looked around at the growing crowd, and for the first time uncertainty flickered across his features. "This is ridiculous. You can't just ignore the law because you don't like it." "We're not ignoring the law," said a new voice. District Attorney Jennifer Walsh emerged from a car that had just pulled into the driveway, flanked by 2 sheriff's deputies. "But you are." Marcus spun around, clearly caught off guard. "Miss Walsh, I wasn't expecting." "I'm sure you weren't," Jennifer said coolly. "Mr. Hendricks, you are in violation of a restraining order. You are on private property without permission, and you are accompanied by what appears to be hired muscle, which suggests intent to intimidate or harm." "Now, wait just a minute," Marcus began, but Jennifer cut him off. "No, you wait. I've spent the last 2 days reviewing your case, Mr. Hendricks. I've spoken with Sarah Peterson at length. I've examined the medical evidence. I've reviewed the photographs of her injuries, and I've done some research into your background." Marcus's face was beginning to flush with anger. "What kind of research?" "The kind that reveals 3 previous girlfriends who obtained restraining orders against you. The kind that shows a pattern of control, isolation and escalating violence. The kind that makes it very clear that you are exactly what Sarah Peterson says you are, a dangerous man who uses money and influence to evade consequences." The confident mask was completely gone now, replaced by ugly rage. "You don't know what you're talking about. Sarah is a liar, a manipulator. Sarah is a 20-year-old woman with medical documentation of sustained abuse." Jennifer interrupted. "And she's under the protection of the court now. Deputies, please arrest Mr. Hendricks for violation of a restraining order." What happened next would be talked about in the community for years to come. Instead of surrendering, Marcus turned to the men he'd brought with him and nodded. They moved forward aggressively, clearly intending to push through the crowd and into the house. They made it exactly 3 steps before they found themselves surrounded by a wall of quiet determination. The Amish community didn't fight, they simply stood firm, linked arms, and made it impossible for Marcus or his men to advance. When the hired men tried to push through, they found themselves gently but immovably redirected. When they tried to go around, more community members appeared to block their path. It was the most peaceful, effective resistance Marcus had ever encountered, and his frustration boiled over into pure rage. "Get out of my way," he screamed. "That's my wife. That's my daughter. You have no right." "I have every right," came a clear voice from the porch. Sarah stood in the doorway, Emma in her arms, flanked by Martha and Anna. She was still pale, still obviously frightened, but there was something new in her posture, something that looked like strength. "I have the right to choose my own life," she continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I have the right to protect my daughter. I have the right to say no to you, Marcus, and I have the right to ask these good people to help me do it." Marcus stared at her, and Ezekiel could see him struggling to regain control of the situation. "Sarah, you're making a mistake. Without me, you have nothing. You're nobody. You'll never survive on your own." Sarah looked around at the faces surrounding her, community members who had welcomed her without question, law enforcement officers who believed her story, advocates who were fighting for her rights. "You're wrong," she said quietly. "I have everything I need. I have people who care about me without trying to control me. I have people who love Emma without seeing her as property. And I have something I never had when I was with you." "What's that?" Marcus sneered. "Hope." The word hung in the cold air like a bell, clear and true and unshakable. And in that moment, Ezekiel saw something beautiful happen. Sarah straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and looked directly at the man who had terrorized her for so long. "You can't hurt me anymore, Marcus. You can't frighten me anymore, because I are something now that I didn't know before." "What?" "I know what love actually looks like, and it doesn't look like you." Marcus made one last desperate lunge toward the porch, but the deputies were ready for him. Within moments he was in handcuffs, still shouting threats and promises of legal retaliation as he was led to a patrol car. As the cars pulled away, Marcus and his hired men in custody, Jennifer Walsh following to process the charges, the crowd of community members began to disperse, but they didn't leave quickly. They lingered, making sure Sarah knew they weren't just disappearing now that the crisis was over. One by one, they approached the porch. Joseph Yoder spoke for many of them when he said, "You're home now, Sarah, both of you, and this community protects its own." As the sun began to set over the snow-covered farm, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Ezekiel found himself standing beside Sarah on the porch, both of them watching Emma sleep peacefully in her mother's arms. "Ezekiel," Sarah said quietly, "that morning when you found the blood in the snow, when you opened the shed door, did you have any idea what you were getting into?" Ezekiel thought about that morning, about the routine that had been broken by footprints filled with blood, about the choice he'd made to follow those footprints instead of turning away. "No," he said honestly. "I thought I was just helping someone who was hurt. I didn't know I was about to find family." Sarah smiled through her tears. "Family? Family," Martha confirmed, emerging from the house with hot coffee for everyone. "That's what you are now, Sarah. That's what Emma is. Family doesn't always come from blood. Sometimes it comes from choosing to love and protect each other." As they sat together on the porch, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky, Ezekiel reflected on everything that had changed since that December morning. His quiet life had become something bigger and more complex, but also more meaningful. The blood footprints in the snow had led him to more than just a mystery. They had led him to purpose, to the profound joy of being exactly where God needed him to be at exactly the right moment. And somewhere in the distance, barely audible but definitely there, came the sound of Emma's soft laughter. The first time Sarah had heard her daughter laugh, the sound of a child who would grow up knowing she was safe, loved and protected by a community that chose love over fear, hope over despair. The blood in the snow had become something else entirely. It had become the first chapter of a new story, a story of healing and hope and the family that forms when people choose to care for each other without condition. It had become love.